Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about one of rock and roll and pop's greatest songwriters. That's right, Neil Sedaka. He's been around since the 50s, and I cannot believe that he hasn't even been listed on the Rock and Roll Music Hall of Fame list. I mean, he should definitely be in there. I mean, he was around when rock and roll was new and exciting and was still appealing to the teen crowd. Now, you normally like to start these episodes off by telling you how I got into the artist, and that's just because I grew up hearing Neil Sedaka songs on the radio. Now, when it finally came to the 70s, when he really hit big with Laughter in the Rain and Bad Blood and things like that, that's really when I sort of could put a face to that voice that I heard on radio for so many, many years. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Now, he wrote what he calls sandwich songs back in the 50s, where he had the main hook at the beginning and the end of the song, and then he would fill that in with sort of the meat of what the song was about. And he wrote a bunch of great things like, let's say like Oh Carol and Calendar Girl and Little Devil. And then, later on, of course, Laughter in the Rain, Bad Blood, The Immigrant, Solitaire. Such an incredibly great songwriter. And that voice, I mean, still today, that voice is so beautiful. But let's get into the CD catalog here. Now, first off, he didn't make a lot of albums in the early days. He was putting out a bunch of singles. And they were, teen-oriented, and they were fun, and they were catchy. Now, his first album came out in 1959. That was called Rock with Sedaka. And there it is there. Now, the album had, like, The Diary and Stupid Cupid and You're Knocking Me Out. And on this CD and on some of the CDs, it's just called Neil Sedaka. But that came out in 1959. Now, most of those songs were written by Neil and his songwriter at that time, Howard Greenfield. But on his second album that came out in 1961, called Circulate, on that album, out of the 12 songs, only 2 of them were written by Sedaka. The rest of them were cover versions. And for a guy like me, of course, I want to hear Neil's self-penned material. Now, those 2 albums I showed you there, Rock with Sedaka and Circulate, those are also available in this 4 CD set. Now, his next album is also there, and it's called Neil Sings Little Devil and Other Hits, and that came out in 1961, and that, of course, had Little Devil, Oh Carol, Calendar Girl, Stairway to Heaven, and there's another album there called Sings His Greatest Hits, so you get 4 albums there on that disc, plus you get a bunch of singles and non-album tracks, and that's a 4 CD set. You're going to want to track that down. There was another compilation that came out in the 60s called The Many Sides of Neil Sedaka. You can get that on that CD with the Little Devil. So I know it gets confusing because some of these albums are mixed up, but that's another collection that came out, I think, 66 or so. Obviously when the British invasion came along, Neil Sedaka wasn't really in demand. Radio stations wanted that mercy beat sound, so he sort of faded away. But he was still writing songs. He was writing songs for other artists, and those songs were no longer those sandwich songs. They were these wonderfully, beautifully constructed pop songs, and he'd record demos, and they'd get recorded. The Monkees recorded songs, and all these artists recorded songs. He didn't actually go back in the studio and release an album until 1969, when he released an album called Workin' on a Groovy Thing, and it only came out in Australia, I believe, at that time. And this was wonderful because it was soulful. It was it was worlds apart from what he was doing in the 50s, but it was still distinctly, uniquely Neil Sedaka. It's just a wonderful collection of songs. Now, that album is not available on its own on CD, but there is this incredible 2 CD compilation called Let the Good Times In. And what this is this contains a lot of the demos and recordings that he had been writing in the 60s. It contains that whole Working on a Groovy Thing album, and it is jam-packed full of great and deep and thoughtful, wonderful pop songs. He may not have been in the charts this time, but he was just recording wonderful music. This is something definitely to track down. Now, before I continue, I wanted to say that there is a Bear Family box set that is out of print that contains stuff recorded before this period. So all the stuff that I showed you before is on a Bear Family box set. Even the recordings he did in Italian, German, Hebrew. If you can track that down, definitely do that. It's very expensive, so that's why I don't own it. That's why I own all this. Still, if you can't track that down, the stuff I'm telling you is just really wonderful. So anyway, after Working on a Groovy Thing, he went over to England and essentially kickstarted his career again. This was a second phase of his career. Now, the first album he put out was an album called Emergence. And now for these two albums and the first album on this 2-CD set, he's backed by 10cc. That's right. Eric Stewart, Graham Goldman, Kevin Godley, and Lol Cream. This was before they became 10cc. In fact, it was Neil Sedaka who encouraged them to go out and record their own music, and thus 10cc was born. But these albums here, now, as I said, Emergence came out in 1971. Now, about that time, he also started working with Phil Cody as a songwriter. Him and Howard Greenfield were not writing songs as much anymore. And the second album on this set is Solitaire. And of course, Solitaire is one of his most famous songs. That's also got That's Where the Music Takes Me, Better Days Are Coming, and of course the title track. It's just really, really wonderful early 70s pop. This was really, he was at the height of his powers. Incredible songs, incredible performances. His voice sounded better than ever. His songwriting was better than ever. Now, his next album, The Tra-La-La Days Are Over, that was recorded in 1973. That is the album that actually contains Love Will Keep Us Together. Of course, he wrote the song, and Captain and Tennille did a version of it, a few years later. But this was where the original version, yes, that's right, the original Love Will Keep Us Together is Neil Sedaka backed with 10cc. And that's another great pop album. That came out in 1973. 1974, he had started recording in America, I think, again. And so the albums no longer contained the members of 10cc. But Laughter in the Rain was the big album. This was not released in the U.S. either. Huge hit song. It also had The Immigrant on it. It had Sad Eyes on it. Lots of great pop songs, and that's that. Since those hadn't been released in America, the American label, which was Rocket Records, Elton John's label, took the best of those previous 4 albums and put together Sedaka's Back. And there it is. This is the album, of course, that made him huge in America again. This has Bad Blood and Laughter in the Rain and Love Will Keep Us Together. And essentially, it's the best of his 70s recordings up until this point. But in America, it was his first album in a long time. And it's really chock-a-block full of great songs, great performances. Now here's where things get a little tiny bit confusing. His next album in America was called Hungry Years. I remember my mom playing this all the time. She loved the song Hungry Years. And this is a great collection of songs. Now in the UK, the album was called Overnight Sensation. And it's right there. So this is essentially the same album. There are some songs that were taken off of one version and added to another. Same album. Came out in 1975. Now, this is when he took his old Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, which was one of his sandwich songs, and created a ballad version. And it's beautiful. But Hungry Years, the song Hungry Years on this album, the title track, beautiful, incredible. His next album, Steppin' Out, contained a lot of great tracks as well. Now, this wasn't quite as successful here in the U.S., but it's got You Gotta Make Your Own Sunshine, which is a great song, Good Times, Good Music, Good Friends, and this came out in 1976. And of course, disco was big, punk new wave and stuff was coming in, and the charts really weren't looking towards Neil Sedaka anymore for hits, although he was still creating great albums, such as a song. This was actually produced by George Martin, came out in 1977. Let me see here. In 1978, out comes All You Need Is the Music, another fine slice of Sedaka pop. Now, the great thing about Neil Sedaka is that he was always able to come up with great melodies, great hooks, charming, but as the charts were getting edgier and more eccentric, he continued to write these warm, crisp, light-hearted, wonderful pop songs. And that's what a lot of people need in their life, but that's not necessarily what the charts were playing. Now, In the Pocket, that came out in 1980. Neil Sedaka Now came out in 1981. You're going to find some real gems on these albums. Now, in 1983, he released an album called Come See About Me, which was a covers album of, rock and soul classics. Of course, I don't own that particular CD, but I wanted to mention it here. Like I said, I like to focus on the albums that feature Neil's originals, such as 1986, Good Times. Still such a great songwriter. Now, after that album, of course, he stepped out of the limelight. And apart from compilations and live albums, I don't think that he really put out anything new studio. Now, I usually don't talk about live albums, but I will talk about some compilations at the end of this video. Now, his next album, 1995, was called classically Sedaka. And what he would do is he would take classical melodies and write his own lyrics to them. So it's classical melodies updated with lyrics. In 1998, out come Tales of Love and Other Passions. Then out comes The Miracle of Christmas, a 2-CD set. This is really kind of cool because what he does is he records a CD full of classic Christmas songs that we all know and love. And then there's another CD of new Christmas songs. So if you're looking for new or old Christmas material, you can get that. This came out in 2005. 2009, he released a children's album called Waking Up Is Hard to Do, which I do not have a copy of. In 2009, still sounding wonderful, still writing wonderful songs is The Music of My Life. And this actually came out in the UK 2009 and then came out in America the following year. Now here is a real treat. In 2012, he came out with The Real Neil, which is a new collection of songs, but it's just him at the piano. And oh my gosh, his voice is truly amazing. And I think he recorded this when he was in his early 70s, and it sounds just like he did on Laughter in the Rain. It's beautiful and warm. And there's a song on here called Beginning to Breathe Again, which is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. If you listen to anything from this album, put on Beginning to Breathe Again, and you'll realize that this guy still has it. Now, he followed that up 4 years later with I Do It for Applause, another collection of him at the piano. And this is wonderful and amazing. Now, that's the last official studio album that he released, to my knowledge. I hope that he's got something coming. I hope that there's a stack of unreleased stuff that he's going to release, because he's still incredibly gifted as a songwriter, as a vocalist, as a performer. But here are some compilations that I've picked up over the years, and these are really fantastic. Now, this one here, he actually did re-record a few songs, not because he couldn't get the rights to it, but just because he wanted to update them, make them sound fresh. I believe this was like 1993 or something. Really great collection of songs. This here is a standard one that you can probably find in most stores. This is an American compilation. Now, a song that I love by him is featured on this called Rainy Day Bells. And it's really, really wonderful. It harkens back to his classic period, but I think it was recorded in the late 60s. It's really fantastic. Here's a collection you could probably get pretty easy. This is called Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, and this is his classic years. This is what most people remember him by. You know, when people think Neil Sedaka, they think, oh yeah, that 50s, 60s guy. But no, he was having hits in the 70s, and he's truly a marvel. Here is yet another Neil Sedaka compilation. This is a 2-CD one. Now, the last compilation I'm going to show you, I really like this because, like I said, I love his 70s stuff, especially 70s going into the early 80s and stuff. And this here is called Laughter and Tears, the best of Neil Sedaka today. And this does have one re-recording on it, but this spans his 70s output. This does not have anything from the 50s or 60s. It's focused on one era, and I really love that. I mean, I love compilations that span an artist's entire career, but sometimes it's nice to say, okay, let's just sit down and listen to 1970s Neil Sedaka, and this is a really good collection. Like I said, it's called Laughter and Tears. Anyway, that is it. I appreciate you sitting around and allowing me to talk about Neil Sedaka. Thanks for spending time with me. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, to ring that bell for future notifications. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.